Hi guys, Rishabh here. Today we are going to talk about minimal APIs. So what is this minimal API and why should we even bother to know about it? Without wasting any more of your time, let's get into it. Last year, Microsoft launched the .NET 6, which along with it brought many significant features. One such feature is the ability to create minimal APIs. Minimal APIs are architected to create HTTP APIs with minimal dependencies. They are ideal for microservices and apps that want to include only the minimum files, features, and dependencies in ASP.NET Core. The minimal hosting model for ASP.NET Core apps requires only one file and a few lines of code. It significantly reduces the number of files and the lines of code required to create an application. So, what is this minimal API approach that is now available to build applications and deploy them? Here, as you can see, I have installed the Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition and the .NET 6 SDK, which comes along with it. If I go ahead and try to create the API project here, as we can see, so now here the framework selected is .NET 6 long-term support, and we are configuring it for HTTPS. We will not be enabling the Docker for this particular project. Here, as we can see, the application consists of one single file, which is the program.cs. And the content, when compared to the traditional .NET 5 or .NET 3.1 applications program.cs, is very different. Let us first go ahead and run the application once. So here, when we run this application, we get this message, "Hello World," which is essentially what has been mapped as the default page. So we'll go ahead and stop this application. If we look at the code, we can see that the minimal hosting model has unified the startup and program class into a single program class. And it does not require a main method as well. In fact, in this case, there is no program class as well, which we used to generate in case of earlier .NET versions. So what happens in this case is the compiler generates a class and the main method as the entry point for the application implicitly. If we see further, the configure services is replaced with web application.service, which means if we want to register any of the services which we want to inject as dependency into the IOC container, we can do that directly from the builder's instance. So here, if I want to add the controller service, we can go ahead and use this instance of builder and add the controller service to it. In this way, we can add the controllers to the application. Now, if I want to add a scoped instance of a service, which I have created, which I want to inject as a dependency on different components of the application, what I can do is, please do not judge the name of the service here. It is just for the examples case that I have named it my personal service. It is up to you. Whatever you want to name, you can name the service as long as it conveys the functionality which the particular service provides. This is how this particular service will be added to the collection of services which can be injected throughout the application wherever the components of the application are dependent on the service. Now, this is about registering the service into IOC container. What about getting the service? So once we have built the builder and we get the application, we can use this app instance to get the services. For example, if I want to use this particular service here, think of configure services method, wherein we used to define all the services and add it to the service collection. Now, if we move ahead from the configure services method to the configure method, wherein in case if we want to use a service which is registered inside the configure services in the configure method, what we can do is we can use this instance of app and get those services. For example, if I want to get that service called my personal service, what I can do is use this instance of app. So in this particular way, I can retrieve those services which are registered in the services collection from the instance of app and go ahead and use the functionality provided by this service wherever I want to use it. The statement builder.build returns a configured web application to the variable app. Configure method is replaced with configuration calls to the same service using app. Now, if we remember from our previous video, the configure method is used to configure the request processing pipeline. So this particular section belongs to earlier configure services method. And once we have built the app, rest of the section will be used to configure the request processing pipeline, which we can relate with the earlier configure method. So here we are building the request processing pipeline if we want to use the static file middleware. So what we can do is we can go ahead and add that middleware. So in this way, we can add this use static file middleware in the request processing pipeline. If we want to log a message using the default logging provider, the default logging provider which Microsoft gives as default, what we can do is we can go ahead and use that default logging provider. We can log the information log. Coming to request handling, if we see we are using these methods called map get or map put or map post. If we go ahead to see the definition of this method, we can see it says add some Microsoft ASP.NET Core routing route endpoint that matches HTTP GET request for the specified pattern. So this particular method is used to match the GET requests. Similarly, we have map post, map put, map delete methods, wherein the first parameter is to accept the pattern and the second one is to define the handler of that particular request. So the first parameter is the pattern wherein we are simply specifying a slash. And then the second part is the handler. So in case this particular GET request is received, how are we supposed to handle that request? So that comes as part of the second parameter for these request handlers. For example, if we want to retrieve from a controller user, user controller with a particular ID. So how can we define this particular route is we can write. So in this way, if we want to get a user by his or her ID, this is how we can specify the request processing pipeline, wherein this first parameter will be the pattern with which the application will check whether this particular request is matching with this pattern. If in case it matches with the pattern, it will take this ID, which is provided as the query parameter, and use it to get the information about this particular ID. So that whole logic of getting the information about the user can go as the handler part, which is defined as the second parameter of this map get method. Similarly, if we want to process a put or post, we can do app.map put, wherein we will have to provide similarly a pattern and the model class which we want to put, or in case we want to post something, if we want to post something, we have to use map post, or we want to delete, then similarly the map delete method will be used. There are lots of other changes which are part of the minimal hosting model. But for this video, as it is just an introductory one, I decided to stick with the basic application structure, which we are going to see as we go forward, as Microsoft seems to be embracing this whole minimal hosting model and it is here to stay. I hope you liked this video. Please give a like, which is right next to the subscribe button. I'd really appreciate if you can subscribe as well. Thank you.